All right. You'll want to keep your Club DB around. There are a few things we might look at as a guide, but as I was telling the class before I started the recording, we do have a new version of the script for the database and for the specification itself. So I'm going to have to download those two things. Anyway, version 2 spec and version 2 SQL script. So that we'll want to go ahead and run right away, the Henry Book script. I will bring it up here in a word processor just to show you the only thing that I did. Well, actually, I guess I should. It might not make sense until we look at the version 2 spec. So here's what I'm proposing. Added step. I think I added it as step 3 or 2, but anyway, it sort of comes at the end. Okay, I added it as step 3, but we already know what we were planning, just to rebuild and restructure Henry Books from Java 3 as a Hibernate framework app, and we're going to add a new book screen, but also, and this was one item that I got from the Just Hibernate text, which is posted, his chapter, I think it's chapter 3 or 4 on, I must be 4, on persisting collections, actually was pretty good, pretty clear. And so what I'm going to ask you to do, and this is kind of a silly option, but anyway, under the inventory page, where you know, in Henry Books you get the logon, and then you get the list of stores, and then you get the inventory for a particular store that's been selected. On that inventory store, or store inventory page, store inventory screen, for a user who's an admin, we're going to add a button for increment all, and that's just going to be a feature to add 1 to the inventory count of every book in the store, as if we'd reordered everything. Okay, and it's just going to be a +1 on the increment. All right, so adds 1 to the inventory count, and it will be implemented using Hibernate's persistence of collections, where the inventory, so you remember we've got an inventory class in the old version. Anyway, that's going to be adapted as a list of inventory objects attached to the store. So you're going to have a one-to-many connection, store to the store's inventory, go through an update process in your servlet, and persist that change back to the database as an entire collection. I have gotten it to work. It caused much pain, especially in my feeble condition over the last few days, but it did eventually work. After many, many error messages, none of which were, of course, helped in the text, so I had to go hunting for everything. All right, so here we go. The version 2 SQL, let's see if I open this with WordPad or something like that. To make this work properly, because we're going to get to use a new annotation, I needed to connect the book inventory and the store. So if we look at the store, publisher, where is it? So stores has a store ID primary key. But then when you get down to the inventory file, which is the book, not the book list. The list is just all the titles that are carried. So book INV is the actual inventory for each store. So there's a store ID and a book, and this is the table where I had previously added an auto increment ID field. What we needed to make the persistence of collections work was a foreign key. So we had to explicitly identify foreign key store ID in book inventory references the store ID in the stores table. So I know that there are commands in MySQL which would accomplish that for us, but I just thought it was easier just to republish the script. So, well, I'm not going to say anything about that yet. It's quite likely that we would want to do something with book ID as well, but that I'm sort of leaving for later, or maybe even for you, depending on how this progresses. But this is just so I can demonstrate the persistence of collections. Okay. Yes, I'm not guaranteeing that version 2 is the actual final of the database. The JPA is making me be much more detail-oriented on my databases. I tend to be rather loose when those comes to those on my projects. Anyway, so let's go up to our command line in MySQL, and I've got to, didn't take note, I am on C drive IS294, and it's Henry Books underscore IS294 underscore ver2.sql. So to rebuild, we do a \dot, in my case C /IS294 /Henry Books underscore IS294 underscore version2.sql. And we hope we don't get a whole bunch of errors shown. Now, if you use Henry Books underscore IS294 and you describe book INV, where the change was made, there's really not much indication of it in this version of the describe, but you can see that the key on store ID is indicated as existing. All right. I did not take the time to go back and check on all the other MySQL command line commands that might have gotten us more detailed information, but we'll live with that. All right. So you want to do a couple of things as we launch our new app. Make sure you've got your Henry Books old version that I posted out there, the Java 3 old style version. You do want to go ahead and make sure you've put that someplace that you can get to it. I hadn't unzipped my file yet. Because we will load it and use it as a code mine for some things. But I'm going to start with an entirely new project, Henry Books JPA. Well, I take that back. Let me open Henry Books project first. All right. So old style Henry Books opened, and now file, new project. So this will be a Java web application. It will be Henry Books JPA, and I will put it on my C drive in my usual spot, if I can find my usual spot. There we go. I still like the Tomcat. Context path, EE7, that looks good. And here we go. Frameworks. Come up frameworks. So we have Hibernate 4.3.1, and we will need a database connection that is not the Derby database. So we're going to add a new database connection. And it will be the MySQL connector J driver. So it will be the MySQL dialect. Yeah, so what we did on the first screen was a new, I can't get, it won't let me go back there, but a new, yeah. So on the second screen, we changed the driver. So it was add new database connection on the first screen. Second screen changed to the MySQL driver. Your drop-down doesn't show other? Yeah, you do the drop-down. No. You change the driver to MySQL, but that should be the driver that it already knows about. Okay. Then the database is Henry Books _ IS294. I don't know if I did it lowercase IS294. And go ahead and use your root and Sesame if you're using our machine and put a remember password in it. And you've got down below what should be the MySQL JDBC connection string that includes Henry Books IS294 as your URL. And we're going to test that connection. And the connection should succeed. So we will go next. I don't know why this doesn't come up with any options, the schema, but it doesn't seem to matter. So just click through that screen. And I don't know if we needed to change input connection name. I don't really see a need to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and click Finish, unless there are problems. Whoop. Do I need to go back? Are we okay on our testing connection? Next twice, and then finish. Okay, so now we are set with a database connection for Hibernate that is to Henry Books and MySQL dialect. Okay? No. So the database name, which should default to MySQL, becomes Henry Books _ IS294. Does not appear to be case sensitive. Root, username, and then on our machines, if we've loaded it, yep, Sesame. Remember password. That should do it. Yeah, test the connection. And then the next are just defaults. No, there seems to be no option on schema. I don't know why. Correct. Connection name can just stay what it is. And here's our great new file. This is the equivalent of the persistence XML file that we had for Eclipse Link. And again, I think Hibernate can actually work with a persistence XML file, but the file that it wants when you go through the default build is hibernate.cfg.xml. Has the same kind of interface as the Eclipse link did. Sorry, I'm going to be coughing into the microphone because of my still getting over my sickness. But anyway, we'll go to a source just to examine it. Do you have a hibernate.cfg.xml file? And it doesn't look like anything like this? I would say that you need to start over. I mean, you can type them in, but I don't. It should have built the Hibernate configuration with all the properties that we just gave it. Did your test connection succeed? Okay, I'll have to see what happened. Well, in one case, in a machine here in the room, we had to just delete the project and try it again. And because the first time no properties showed up, but the second time all the properties did show up. I have no idea why. But what you should be seeing is the JDBC driver class, the MySQL dialect, which is a special designation inside Hibernate, so it knows how to build its SQL and that sort of thing. The URL is Henry Books IS294, and then your username and password. So it's very much like the persistence XML file from the Eclipse link, just Hibernate configuration instead. And we will be modifying this as we go along, because one thing that Hibernate does ask for is an explicit statement of what classes are being used if you do annotations. Hibernate can actually, you can use XML files to define your database tables and the connections between them, or you can do the annotations the way we did with Eclipse Link. I certainly don't want to learn something completely new, so we're going to use annotations. But I do think, from what I've seen, that that is the more common approach. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So if you've got different entries than what you should, this file is completely editable, and you may make direct changes to it. As I said, we will do that in the future. Okay. Oh, you need. Yep. Oh no, you've got the wrong. Yeah, you've got the wrong dialect and driver. So you didn't change to the MySQL JConnector when you. Yeah. So that's what we had to do on the other machine. We had to, even though it wouldn't let us create a new JDBC connection to Henry Books, but when we went back and just selected existing connection, the properties came up. It's very strange. We are going to need our typical packages. So go ahead and build yourself a package for business and a package for servlets. Now it likes this Hibernate config file in the default package so that there's no path. You could move it somewhere and put it in business, for example, and it works fine. For now, I'm just going to leave it in the default package area. So we're going to end up with servlets, business, and the Hibernate XML file in default. Yep. Yep. I mean, are you having to type the properties in by hand? Oh, okay. We may have to take a look at it afterwards. But I was going to say I could print this out if it would be of any use to you. Okay, so from the original Henry books, let's grab logon JSP, the first page, and just right-click and copy, and then go into your web pages in the JPA version and right-click and paste. So I'm just going to move logon JSP over, and I'm going to build, because I don't have any servlets yet, and I want that. I want the web XML file, which is here, but I want it updated automatically. I'm going to build my own logon servlet. If you look at the old Henry books, we've got logon servlet.java in the servlets area, and I am going to build that. So right-click on servlets, new servlet, logon servlet, and remember, when you get to the main configuration page, you add the deployment descriptor to web XML, and you shorten the URL pattern to just logon, because that's the way it exists in the web page. But this should all be second nature. You did this last semester or previous course anyway. All right. And I'll do my usual trimming out of unnecessary stuff. But we hope that our servlet, because we're now using JPA with Hibernate, will be much shorter than the previous servlet. So we don't want that code for the most part anyway. But, well, I guess I should back up and say that my goal now is to rebuild the user logon process with Hibernate as the retrieval tool for the user object. So to do that, I can go ahead from my old project and grab user.java as well. So from the old Henry books, we've just taken logon JSP, and now we will take user.java. So I'm going to right-click on that and copy, and then come down to my JPA version and right-click and paste into business. Oh, paste with just a copy. A refactor copy is not needed. But if you remember the steps, the process here, we wanted to have the servlet read the input field. Oh, question first. Yes. No. Henry books. The Henry books old version that I posted out on Blackboard. It's part of the assignment block. Yeah, ClubDB won't get us any of this code. Yeah. So on the assignment, there's a henrybooks.zip. That's a full working version of a Java 3 program, final project program, although it doesn't even use connection pools, it just uses the JDBC connector everywhere. Yeah, so you definitely need to download, unzip that, and link it into your code area. Housekeeping. Housekeeping is always trickier than we expect. Yeah, so logon and user.java are the two items that we have pulled from the old Henry books and posted. So let's go a little bit in terms of the servlet, just to get up to a point where we go, okay, well here's where Hibernate should help us. So in the servlet, I'm in logon servlet. We're going to have our string. I don't think we need SQL. How about just message? String message. We are going to have a string for URL, and for right now, for our purposes of our test system, I'm going to just have it keep going back to logon JSP. Even if it successfully authenticates at this point, I'm just going to have it tell us that it was okay. All right, now we also, to test authentication, will need a password attempt, which is pwd attempt. I'm initializing that to 0. And we have an integer for user ID. You can initialize it to 0, although I don't think that'll be really, either one of those are probably not going to be needed. So user ID is numeric in the Henry Books scheme, and this will be coming in from the user input page. Was there a question? Okay, and our hope is that we'll eventually end up with a user object U, which I'll initialize to null here. And since we've copied user.java into our business, we can now do an import. So we'll import business.user. And I think I've got one more. Well, I don't know if I need that Boolean or not. I had a Boolean for authenticated, true or false, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. Okay, so we know that our try catch starts out the same way. Now we could copy this code from the other servlet, but no need. So user ID will be an integer parse int of request get parameter user ID, and if you'd like to trim that out at the same time you bring it in, that doesn't hurt. Request.get parameter. Did I misspell it? Get P-R-A-M-E-T-E-T-E-R. Yeah, I did misspell it. I noticed that when I have been sick these last few days, my typing was terrible. I kept getting my fingers got on all the wrong keys all the time. Okay, so there's our user ID, because we're going to want to do a pull from the database for one specific user to check. And then we're going to have our password attempt, which can be an integer parse int of request get parameter, and this name is PASSWORD, password, all spelled out. Okay. Well, it's time. We didn't get very far, and we're ready to have you, our user object, be set equal to. Now, if you do read through the just Hibernate text that's posted, he does not structure his projects like we did with Eclipse Link, and in fact, he does not structure his projects in the way that seems to be normal for Hibernate. So I'm going to adhere to our earlier structure. It'll look similar. So what we're going to have is a user DB class and a getUser method in that class which needs to receive user ID. So this is our first use of Hibernate. Oh, one thing I have discovered about Hibernate, which I do like quite a bit, is that you can actually write genuine full SQL. It has its own Hibernate query language, the way Eclipse Link had, and it matches the JPA query language. But you can actually write direct SQL as well. So I haven't done that yet in the project I'm building, but anyway, it's available. Okay, so here we go. What do we need to make Hibernate do its thing for us? Well, several things, actually, as it turns out. The first thing, it apparently is I thought for sure I printed it out, and now I'm not seeing it in my notes. Oh, there it is. I was going to say, I can't remember this if I have to do this from scratch. Okay, we need a utility database tool. Basically, the way Eclipse Link, we did a DB util. Murak did that for us for that implementation. We're going to have the same thing for Hibernate. It just builds it in a slightly different way. So you can think of it as an entity factory and an entity manager. It just Hibernate doesn't call it that. So in business, we're going to oh, I'm sorry, I'm starting to feel it. We're gonna build our class, but let me show you one other thing. So if you go to business and you right click and ask for a new other, instead of just a Java class, you can ask for other. And Hibernate has some interesting tools with it. So if you scroll down under your other and click Hibernate, it has some wizards that will help you reverse engineer a database into annotated classes and some other mapping tools. And it also has this Hibernate util.java. Unfortunately, it's wrong. It's wrong. So I don't even know if it's worth building. I'm not even going to build. So I'm not even going to choose this one. It's there because as I was reading on the internet in the chat rooms, everyone was complaining about, well, you know, hey, this utility class, you have to have it all the time. Why doesn't it just build it for you when you create your application? So they made it a tool, and it doesn't build it correctly for the current version of Hibernate. Okay, so cancel that. We're going to build Hibernate util ourselves. So on business, new Java class. No, it's just wrong. It doesn't match the current version of Hibernate. So when they went to Hibernate 4.3, they deprecated a bunch of stuff, and that Hibernate util still uses deprecated. So I think it actually, when it builds it, it has methods that are crossed out, and they don't work right. I don't know. That's an interesting question because the new NetBeans is out. We might try and see if it improves on the Hibernate, but it's not that big a deal to build it ourselves. So we will do that. So we will build Hibernate util.java, and I'm just going to dump it in my business folder. All right, so because of the JPA, underlying JPA requirements, there is an object which is thread safe, and then there is an object which is instance specific. And so in Hibernate, that object is called a session factory instead of an entity factory. So private static session factory, and the thing I found most often was just lowercase session, uppercase f. So we're going to have a session factory that's called session factory lowercase s. But that will require an import. So we're going to add the Hibernate session factory import to our system. What else doesn't it like? Private static session factory under Hibernate util class. Yeah, okay. I think that's going to be right. Oh, I'm sorry. No. I put parentheses on it. Don't want the parentheses. You want a global object. It's not a method, it's an object. So the parentheses were what was confusing it there. Okay, and then a public static get session factory. So the session factory object will be returned by the get session factory method, which is a static public method. And it only, because the session factory is thread safe, you only need to build it, one time when it doesn't exist. So if the global session factory is null, then we're going to go through the following steps. We build a configuration. I'm going to put a little note in here. Load configuration and mappings from hibernate.cfg.xml. So this next command that we're about to type is what goes out to that Hibernate configuration file and loads it, basically, processes it. And it looks like this. It's a configuration which is a new configuration dot configure. So there's a configuration object that we need an import for. And if we look at that, there's a Hibernate CFG configuration. Now, and so we'll do that import. Config your, cannot find symbol. Configuration dot configure config. What did I do? Configuration dot. Oh, yep. That's we're calling the method of the configuration class. Okay, so I had parentheses where I didn't need them before, and now I was missing them. Okay, now we've got configure. All right, so we're going to run the configure. It's a chained constructor setup, which is a little odd. I mean, we haven't used that very much, but anyway, it's there for us. Okay, so now and also I should note that you can put, if you put you can put in the parameter to the configure method, you can put the specific location of your config XML, the Hibernate CFG XML file. So if it's somewhere other than the default package, you'd have to, I mean, if we put it in business, then we'd need to put business/hibernate.cfg.xml. It would go right there. But we left it where it defaulted, so we'll leave it that way. Okay, now, and this I have not fully looked into, and this is one of the things that changed with the 4.3 Hibernate the way you process the configuration and build your factory. So we need a service registry object. Sorry. So service registry object, service registry. No E. Will be equal to a new, and now we've got to do some funky stuff, standard service registry builder and that standard service registry builder needs a dot so that we can run the apply settings method against the configuration object, which is configuration, but you have to do a dot get properties dot build. Okay, now we need some imports, and let's see if our, oops, wait a minute, sorry, I have a parenthesis out of place. It's configuration properties go to the apply settings, and then the build is actually a part of the service registry class. So we're building using this registry builder from the properties that the configuration loaded in order to apply those settings into our service registry. Okay, so now with the parentheses in the right spot, I should be able to do my import and have the red go away. So we're going to import the Hibernate service registry. And same for the builder, Hibernate boot registry standard service registry builder. Go figure. Okay, so let's review. We'll only have to type this one time, and then we'll be good. Service registry is a new standard service registry builder process using the apply settings. Parameter to apply settings are the configuration properties. So you do a get properties off the configuration object, and then you run the build. Okay. Now we can finally build a session factory from the service registry. And that is done as follows. Our global session factory object can now be created with actually a method of the configuration object. So session factory is configuration object dot build session factory taking the service registry. So you'll notice that the deprecated used to just be build service or build session factory with no service registry involved. Now you have to do it this way, and as I say, I don't really know why yet. Okay, so session factory has been built. All of that was in our if block, and since this is a get for the session factory, all we have to do is return that object. So return session factory object from this method, and if it was null, it's created. If it wasn't null or after it's created, it's returned. Whew. So there's your Hibernate equivalent of the DB util that we wrote with our Eclipse link, our Club DB. Well, the next step is that we want to make user an annotated class for persistence. So I'm going to go to user. Oops. I don't know what just happened there. Okay. This is strange. I fouled my project up. Why isn't it fixed? Okay. Windows, reset Windows. I'm not sure what happened there. All right. Oops. I'm looking at projects again. I want to look at. Finally. Okay. User.java. So this process, because the annotations are all a part of the JPA underlying spec, will be pretty much the same as we did previously. So we're going to have @entity, @table, and the table name in our database is users. Now, here's the weird thing. There's an entity import for both persistence and hibernate. So all of these annotations that we've been using, entity table, etc., have both of these options, and it doesn't seem to matter. I'm still trying to figure out. So I've just been using the persistence entity object rather than the hibernate entity. But it didn't make any difference in the way the operation processed. I would assume so. Yes, that it's an extends or implements. Thanks. Okay, so we're going to have a private int store ID and private int password. These are all going to be annotated. So the we also need though, user ID. So user ID in the users table is the primary key. So this is an @ID annotation with column. Name is users. Name is user ID. And let's take a look at that column. So if we describe users, user ID. All right, and we'll do our imports for those. And then after user ID, we have store ID, which only requires us to identify the column. And so the name is store ID. And then password has a column of user password. Now, it doesn't really matter, of course, what order you do things in, but the password attempt is not, of course, in the database, so it's a transient. So I'm just going to put it down below as a private int password attempt. And interesting that Java persistence transient is the only option there. But the string for username and admin level, both of those private strings are in the database. So the Username is column, name of user name, and misspelled private there, at column, name equals admin level. All right. So I think that will actually get us what we need on our entity for the users table. I'll give you a minute to catch up on some typing there. Yeah. But this is also the point at which we can jump back to the Hibernate configuration file and identify this class as an annotated entity. I don't know if that's redundant to say that or not. Is everybody okay on? I'm sorry, back where? Oh, I just did Java persistence imports for everything. Presumably Hibernate versions add some functionality, but I did not have time to find out exactly what that might be. Yep. It can actually be mixed in. I moved password attempt after everything else because it just logically I like to see all the columns together that are actually in the table. Oh, I never corrected my start page, did I? If you don't have anything else to do, you might go back to the web XML in the INF folder, because our welcome file is logon.jsp, not index.html, and once you change it to logon.jsp, there's no reason you can't delete index.html. Are we okay on our the index.html file? You don't get you change the welcome designation in the web XML to be logon.jsp. Whoops. In other words, welcome file list is now just logon.jsp. Okay, so here's what we have to do for Hibernate to be happy about our use of annotations. Go to the Hibernate CFG XML, and we can just do this in source. There's no reason not to type directly. Inside the session factory, so that it's loaded when the session factory is built, we have a mapping tag. Class equals business dot user. It's just the way it's designed. It just requires this, and as the little text tells you, there are 3 ways you can do this. You can do it programmatically and actually add, you can run through an annotations, add this class to my annotations list after you build the factory, or you can do it here, or you can do it inside a table definition file. So lots of different ways to do it. But I think this is the most current or au courant approach. All right, we're getting close, except we're also running out of time for tonight, but we now need our UserDB equivalent that we had in ClubDB. Is everybody okay on so far in this one? So inside business package, I'm going to right click and ask for a new Java class. It will be UserDB. All right. UserDB has a structure similar to the DBs that we did for ClubDB. It'll be a static method, so public static user, it returns a user object, get user, and it receives a user ID as a parameter. It doesn't actually require an import for the user object because we are putting this in business altogether. Okay, so you have to start with a session factory. Session factory equals, now we've got the tool, hibernate util dot get session factory. But that will require the import in this class, so hibernate session factory import. Then we're going to actually have, so that's the thread safe object, so we just have to get it out of our utility. But the instance specific object, like our entity manager, is called a session. So we're going to build a session object called session. You don't have to call it session, of course, but that seemed to be the norm. And that will come from the hibernate session import. So I'm declaring it, setting it to null. I'm also declaring a user object u that I'm setting to null, and now we're going to do our work. So in a try-catch, we are going to try to instantiate our session by using the session factory. That's the object, which has an open session. Now, this is also something that was of great confusion to me. I'll just mention it to you. There's some underlying stuff going on with Hibernate, so that even though we're building our session as a local variable, Hibernate is keeping the session. So there's an open session and there's a get current session. And I am going to have to spend some time figuring out why it works this way and what you're supposed to do. I have used open session throughout, but if you use open session, you have to close it when you're done, because when you go to update the database, you run the risk of having two sessions, Hibernate thinking there are two sessions open, and it doesn't know which one to update. Anyway, so I'm going to do an open session rather than a get current session. And then we are going to build some queries that look just a whole lot like the queries that we are now familiar with. So we're going to have a string QS, query string, which will be a command that looks like this. From user, looks familiar, right? So from the user, this is the object, the annotated object. From user, pull the data, in other words, where user ID is equal to UID. So that looks a whole lot like what we've already done before. Then we are going to create a query object, Q, from the session. So we're going to do a session dot create query using QS. And so that'll be an import. Org Hibernate query. And then we will set our parameter that's in our query. So we'll do a q.set integer. It is an integer. And it's the UID parameter. And we will set it indeed with the UID that came into the method. And then we'll try to recover our user. So user, you have to cast it. Queries have a unique result option. So I just decided to go ahead and use it and see how it worked. So if you're expecting just one result to come back, you can do a q.unique result, and we should have a U. If we catch any exception E, we're going to set U to null. And here's where the code that I ended up with may vary somewhat from some of the code you see around in chat rooms and others. I have a finally, like we were doing with Eclipse Link, that does a close on the session. And then, of course, the last thing you do is return U. And so that, for Hibernate, looks a lot like what we've already done for Eclipse, except it uses the session factory and this session object. Okay, well, we're essentially out of time. If we go back to the login servlet, I will do one more thing. And then we'll just do a quick test and let's see, not the logon JSP, but the logon servlet. We're down to user DB, and we do need an import for that. So business user DB. And then let's just say if U is not null, then my message is user found. Otherwise, message is no user returned from database. I will do a request set attribute for message, and then I'll be done. Oh, let's see. Let's do. I need a catch here, so we'll catch exception E. Message is servlet error e.getMessage, and oh, I guess I need to set that attribute down below. So I'm going to bring that line out of the try because I might have a message on a catch. So I'm going to do Control X, bring it down below. I did want to get somewhere that I could do a little test, and then I'm just going to grab from the previous logon servlet the request dispatcher stuff. Oops, went too far. Where are you? There you are. Request dispatcher, and put it in my new servlet. Do the import, and I'm going to see if it will run. I'm already over time, and it probably won't run. I probably have typos somewhere, but let's just see what happens. So I'm going to set this as my main project, and I will try to run it. Tomcat's booting up. Uh, 1234 is the user ID with 111 as the password. User found. That's a miracle. Okay, so as I said, I will probably tomorrow at the latest on Friday, I'm just going to continue on so that I give you a little homework this week to do in terms of following a continued recording from here. So look for that by the weekend. I'll send an announcement.